Do your thing. So I will be introducing the fabulous Dr. Marc Gafni solo this evening, as Sharif is on his way home from a guy's ski trip. And I must say, though, I missed my husband terribly. I had a really fun time doing all the things we as a couple have agreed not to do. So the dogs ran wild around the property with their muddy feet. The molting cats slept in bed with me on his side. And I drank the good tequila, and I used his razor. So here we are on our fifth
that's
salon.
Awesome. Forget about existential risk. We've done everything now.
Oh yeah, it's over. It's over.
We've lived.
I lived this weekend like no other.
Bad girl.
I'm a bad girl, and I loved every minute of it. So here we all are, you beautiful people, for our fifth salon, listening to the extraordinary thoughts birthed and incubated at the Center for Integral Wisdom, which Mark helms, along with some of the greatest thought leaders in the world, whom I had the great pleasure to spend a recent virtual retreat weekend with as the co-chair of the organization. So Mark continues to blow my mind and heart open with life-changing interior and exterior sciences, ancient lineages, and postmodern exposés that rock the world, literally. It is my great honor to turn the mic over to Dr. Gafni for this evening's foray into the great work we are establishing here among us for our present, past, and future, and that of our beautiful children and grandchildren. Mark?
Wow, that was just, I mean, the aliveness of Gabrielle tells us that we have a future, right? That is the future. So Gabrielle, it's delightful to be with you. And Sharif, right? We love you, Sharif, but you're losing out, man, right? You're in a plane over, the country. You're not with us, but you are with us, and we love you madly, and we can't wait to have a safe landing. And friends, right? This entire conversation is not just about a safe landing, but it's about the future. And it's about the memory of the future. And we're now in our fifth salon, and we're having a series of extraordinarily serious conversations. We're talking about the unimaginable, which needs to be imagined. We're filled with concern, and we're filled with joy, with the energy of joy, and it's joy that comes from the privilege to imagine the future and then to step in and intervene in the future. But when we step in and intervene in the future, we're not violating the cosmos, we're an expression of the cosmos. And I want to explain that sentence by the end of today.
Hey, Mark, just to check in, your volume's a little low.
Volume's a little low.
You want to hear every single word.
Wow. Why does Christina never say that to me? I want to hear every single word. No, hold on one second. Here we go. No, she does actually. She is awesome. Okay, hold on one second. There we go. Better now, friends? Is that better?
Yes.
Much better.
Okay, so thank you very much, sweetheart. So what we want to actually try and understand, and I want to try and explain this sentence at the end of today, which is, why is it that us stepping into the future and intervening in the future, that's not a violation of the flow of events. It's not a violation of cosmos. It actually is the cosmos acting, right? And what does it actually mean that we are the cosmos in person, right? And that actually, right, we are in some, profound, right, and deep way. And Suzette, I see someone wants to be let in there, so let's let them in, right? That we are in some deep way, we are the future, right? The future actually lives in us in some, fundamental way. So I want to talk about that notion of we are the future and what that means scientifically, right? What that means in terms of interior science, what that means in terms of mystical science. Now, I want to start with, and we're in our fifth conversation, and what I'm trying to do is create a field of language. And I have to be very clear, and I want to really welcome everyone. I welcome all the people that are listening here in person, and the many more people that are listening, as they're listening to the replay. So I want to just make one thing clear in the covenant between us. I have no interest in entertaining you. right? I don't care if you like me. It doesn't matter to me at all. I love you dearly, love you madly. I hope we love each other. I'd love to love you. But in terms of this presentation, right, I'm not interested in entertaining you, and I'm not interested in being smart, right? I'm not selling you anything. I'm actually doing you a huge freaking favor, right? Which is my delight. And I want to be a little bit in your face about it, right? Because we got to be in the face of this, right? This is not, I don't want to do a lovely talk, right? I don't want to be like, oh, did we succeed? Because people said it was a great talk. Who cares if it was a great talk? There's about nothing less relevant. Was there a great talk in the world? So what? So I want to get us all out of that. And I want to be deliberately here and gently and sweetly, but a little bit in our face. This is not about a great talk. It's not about something that was lovely. It's not about something that was entertaining. This is about the very future of reality. Will there be a future to reality as we know it? And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about existential risk and catastrophic risk. That's our topic. And what do we need to do to respond to existential risk and catastrophic risk? That's the single most important question of the day, because it addresses not only the present, but will there be a future? When I say will there be a future, will there be a human future that bears any resemblance to humanity as we know it? And most people live with their heads literally in the sand and are not tracking, right, actually what's going on. What's going on is shocking, expected. It's been in play for several decades. It's now speeding up. And imagine the difference between the world in 1900 and the world in the year 2000. Just imagine that 100-year gap, right? So if you get that 100-year gap, you get that it was exponentially faster than anything happened between 1800 and 1900. And anything that happened between 1800 and 1900 was exponentially faster, right, than anything that happened between 1700 and 1800. And anything that happened between 1700 and 1800 was exponentially faster than anything between, right, 1600 and 1700, right? So you get a sense. Now it's going to be exponentially. It's not going to be just as different as it was 1900 to 2000, right? It's going to be in terms of, right, the law of accelerating change, which I could talk about for 3 hours. We won't, but it's actually a fact today, right? This exponential change. It's not linear change. It's exponential change, right? So in this exponential change, in which every change builds upon the change before it, and they're all happening simultaneously, cross-culturally around the globe, being integrated in this exploding exponential growth curve, a growth curve that could well fall off the graph and implode, right? So what the world's going to look like, to the extent that there is a human world as we recognize it, if there is one, it's going to look so fundamentally different than the world is today. And we need to actually assure that A, that there will be a world of humanity, and two is that humanity will actually have evolved or look at least fundamentally like what we consider humanity, and not have degraded and into fundamentally, programmed data bits, right, in a huge algorithmic system, right, in which, right, our essential sense of choice, agency, right, mobility, transformative potential is actually disappeared. And so we're facing two forms of existential risk. They're both unimaginable, right? One is the death of humanity, and two is the death of our humanity. And we talked about those two forms in different ways in the last few weeks, in the last 4 salons. And what I want to do, with your permission as everyone, is I'm going to recapitulate some of what we said, and I want to add 2 new major dimensions today, 2 huge new major dimensions. But I want to gradually recapitulate, okay? So let me just check in on the chat box, okay, for a second, if that's okay. And we can kind of talk right together. So just who's tracking? Just find me in the chat box. Who's tracking? Who's been with us before? Let's just get a sense of who's with us. Who's been with us before? Give us in the chat box, right? Yay. Who else? Who else? Only one person to respond to. 2, right? 3. Keep going. Who else? Who else? There's only 3 people have right? Go 4, 5. Good. Who else? Just someone say who else? Who else is here? Who's been here before? Okay, fantastic. Great. Who else? Right. Well, let's get used to the chat box. Awesome. Who else? Keep going. Keep going. I'm nudging you a little bit. Anyone else? There's more people here than have responded in the chat box. See if you can find the chat box. It's on the bottom. It's on the bottom. Okay, fantastic, right? Okay, good, 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 right? Good, good. Okay, so a couple of new people. John, welcome. Right, a couple of new people. Okay, fantastic. Okay, anyone else new? Who else is new? Anyone else is new? Yay, I'm still in that chat box. Okay, we got a sense of it. Okay, we got a little bit of a sense of it. So we're going to recapitulate. We're going to move forward. So one, I'm not going to recapitulate what the existential risks are. We've talked about them in great length. In a sense, the one I'm least concerned about is climate change. That's the one I'm least concerned about. I mean, that's an important issue, but it's one of 10. Right? Existential risks means that an event or set of events will happen that will be the end of humanity as we know it. Okay? We call that the second shock of existence. Now I'm going to see if we're just developing, right, a language here together. And we're going to go exactly 60 minutes from when we started. So every minute now counts. And our purpose is, we actually want to create here in Miami, Florence. That's why we're here. We're here to create Florence. Florence in Italy at the height of the Renaissance. And so we made a decision at the Center for Integral Wisdom, which Gabrielle Anwar co-chairs, right, with her husband Sharif, succeeding Barbara Marx Hubbard, succeeding John Mackey, the chair of Whole Foods, right? We've been doing this together for a few years as we've been looking for the last decade, right, at the future in a very, very serious way, in a way that often intelligence agencies haven't been able to look at it. Virtually no universities have looked at it. There's only 3 or 4 centers for existential risk around the world. Cambridge and Oxford are the 2 most significant ones, but they're actually calculating the forms of risk, and they're not in any serious way dealing in terms of response. How do we respond to the existential risk? And the 1 or 2 places that are doing any kind of serious work around responding to existential risk are responding to kind of governance issues, infrastructure issues, but not to what we would understand, and I believe correctly, as the actual generator functions of existential risk. And it's only by addressing the generator functions that we can actually address existential risk. Now, you might ask yourself, this is ridiculous. How could I possibly participating, right, in a conversation that's such an elite conversation, right, of such importance? Right? This must be handled somewhere. Well, that's inaccurate, right? There are now more conversations happening in the world. Virtually none of them are addressing the essential generator functions of existential risk. What's causing existential risk at its core? And it's only if you address the generator function that you can actually address existential risk itself. Now, again, we've said there's 2 forms of existential risk. One, the death of humanity, meaning we lose all future generations, all future joy, all future goodness, all future truth, all future beauty. Right? As I've shared with you before, the hard math on that is in the next 600-700 years, 50%. And crunching the hard numbers as they've done at the Oxford Center for Existential Risk, Toby Ord, right? In the next, 80 years, it's 1 in 6. Now, 1 in 6 is insanely high. Do you get how high that is? They're crunching the numbers 1 in 6 in the next 80, 90 years. That's unimaginable, right? That level of risk. It's an unimaginable level of risk. Okay. So that's the death of humanity. And then there's the death of our humanity, meaning it's not that there's no more human beings, but what we understand as humanity, the experience of being a human being, experience of autonomy, right? The experience of freely choosing, of free will, right? Of loving, right? Of being transformation. That's what disappears. And what we focused on last time, right, friends, what we focused on last time was the death of our humanity. And we looked at the techplex, right, which is a form of what we're calling techno-feudalism, surveillance capitalism, right, which is moving us towards the death of our humanity. And we talked about that in great depth last time. I'm not going to recapitulate it now. I want to focus on, and here we start. Okay, that's enough kind of background. We're kind of just getting into the conversation. So let's see if we can get some terms. We can create a language together. Okay, so how many people remember when we talked about the first shock and the second shock of existence? Okay, so by the first shock of existence, what do we mean, right? And if you know, write it in the chat box, okay? Because I'm going to begin to create a field of language. We're here at the Center for Integral Wisdom. right? We are activists for the future, right? We're creating a new future, but first we have to diagnose the situation. So the first shock of existence means, right, at the dawn of existence, the human being realized that the skull grins at the banquet. And the skull grins at the banquet means it was the realization of death. And death as an existential reality, not just as a physical reality. Not the bison just got me, right? Or the bison might get me in the next 5 minutes, but no, I'm going to die, right? In other words, the experience of anticipating my future death, right? So where death becomes part of the existential reality of the human being, we can date that fairly precisely. And that actually is what kicked off culture, what kicked off the evolution of interiority, right? So death, or the realization of death, is not an accident in cosmos. It's not a bug in the system. It's actually was part of the unfolding of humanity, right? The intentional evolution of the intelligent cosmos that wanted to generate humanity and wanted to move us, if you will, up from Eden, right? Not a fall away from Eden, but up from Eden, right? This evolutionary move where we become self-aware. That's the first shock of existence, the realization, the death of the human being. And we go through all of history, right? Which is about 7 or 8 major structure stages of human development. We won't go into them now. We will spend some time on that in a few weeks, knowing these structure stages that actually live in all of us. It's about 7 major levels of consciousness in human history. All of them are actually available on the planet today, but all of them dominate at a particular era. Without knowing them, you actually can't even access reality. We'll talk about them probably 2 or 3 salons from now. But when we go through all those stages, what do we arrive at? We arrive at, really in the last 50, 60 years, a dawning realization that's just finding its way into the public just barely, which is what I call the second shock of existence. Now, what's the second shock of existence? Anybody? Not the death of the human being, but the death of humanity. Right? We actually, and Robert J. Lifton has written about this, right, extensively, and an important thinker, right? We actually realize the unimaginable, right? That we could actually not be here, right? It's actually the death, right, of humanity, right, which is an entirely different experience. Okay, so that's the first shock and the second shock of existence. Okay, now let's stay close. Okay, now again, I'm going to go to the chat box again. I'm going to just see if we're creating a field of language, because where are we? We're not in Miami. We're in Miami that's becoming Florence. We're establishing this base, right, of face-to-face work, which we want to establish here in Miami, right? But we're going to be working together from around the world, right? The center, in order to actually address existential risk. And our intention is to change the course of history. Right? We need to have that intention. That's our intention. Our intention is actually to step in. Imagine Leonardo da Vinci in the Renaissance, right? Who gathers, there's about 1,000 people involved in the Renaissance. I say this almost every time we meet, just so we can get the significance of it. And there's inner circles who actually study deeply, and they articulate a new field of language, a new field of ideas, a new understanding of reality, of the human being and the human being's relationship, right, to reality. And that set of ideas has shaped every single person on this call and anyone listening to the call. That's called modernity. And to the response to the pandemic of the Black Death, the response to the brutal suffering that swept reality at that moment was to tell a new story. And that new story transfigured all of reality. So we are at that same kind of moment. Just like the Renaissance, right, was a time between worlds and a time between stories, in which a group of people that could actually move beyond their own egoic interest, their own egocentric interest, or even their own ethnocentric interest. And so many people, even wonderful people on this call and wonderful people listening, have written to me, but I'm going to do this for my family and I'm going to do this for my career. Have a nice time. And you should, and that's beautiful, right? But if you can't see beyond that, then you can't take your seat at the table. There's some people who can take their seat at the table of history. And the reason you're here is because you can, and we can, and we have to together. And we need that level of audacity. And we think somebody else is handling it in some room someplace. That room doesn't exist, right? There's few of us thinking about this around the world, and we need to come together and pool our resources and pool our intelligence and actually address this existential risk in a serious way. And so what we want to do is what we've done in the last 4 salons is we've tried to look for the generator function of existential risk. Okay? What's the generator function? Does everyone get what I mean by the generator function? I mean, what's the root cause? I mean, it's underneath climate change, right? Underneath rogue terrorist weapons, right? Underneath methane gas on the Siberian tundra, right? Underneath, right, having depleted the earth, right, through the extraction model of resources that it took billions of years to create, right? Underneath Piketty's pointing, right, to the emergence of this massive gap between haves and have-nots, in which we're literally reintroducing in the 21st century a caste system, right? Worse than the worst form of the Indian caste system. We're introducing levels of slavery exponentially larger, right, than slavery at the height, right, of the American Civil War. And we're introducing, right, a level of suffering that's unimaginable in the world because, right, even though certain forms of suffering are going down, less poverty, we've done a very good job at eliminating certain forms of extreme poverty. We've cut it in half, right, at least until COVID, right? But what all that means is, and it's very beautiful, it means that you have less people living on less than $2 a day, which is wonderful and gorgeous, right? But objectively, there's far more suffering than there was 200 years ago, because 200 years ago, there were 500 million people on the planet, right? So if today you have 7.7 billion or close to that, and 20% are abjectly suffering in some significant way, and that's minimal, abject suffering, minimal 20%, probably closer to 40 or more, right? Then just in terms of numbers, the level of suffering on the planet has exponentially spiraled. And so we need to actually address in some real way, right, what are the generator functions, right, for this level of suffering, which ultimately, according to the forecasts that we've outlined, right, leads to a very strong potential of existential risk, meaning risk to our very existence, or minimally catastrophic risk, right, wide range catastrophe, but more likely existential. Okay, so what are the generator functions? Okay, and this is what we've talked about the last 4 salons. I'm going to introduce a huge new piece today, 2 new pieces, but we can't do the new pieces unless we have them in context, and we can't create Florence unless we create a field of language together. Okay, so I apologize for what might seem like my temerity, right? I don't mean it that way. I mean it, with quivering tenderness, but with fierce urgency, and with what we call in one branch of mysticism, hitlahavut. And hitlahavut, right, accurately translated, is ecstatic urgency. There's an ecstatic urgency to this conversation. Okay, so what are the generator functions of existential risk? Anybody in the chat box? A whole bunch of people here have studied with me for a while, so help us out. Well, let's do this together. What's the first generator function of existential risk? Okay, so the first generator function of existential risk. Anybody in the chat box who's been here? Anybody? Let's see if we're creating a field of language. Don't be shy, right? Don't be shy. So what would it be? What would it be? Ben knows, right? Lots of people know, right? We've talked about this, right? But yay, Ben always knows, right? So what is it? So the first generator function is the lack of a coherent global story, right? Lack of a coherent global story. I'm looking at a book right here. Just for example, right? The Revolt, right? Bill Clinton, wrote an introduction. It's written by a secular, kind of reporter, right? Talking about all the, problems of reality. In the last chapter, and we've been talking about this for 10 years. It's now beginning to trickle into culture. Last chapter, chapter 21, is called A New Story. Book's not great. Last chapter is a new story, right? And he's got no new story. He basically says we don't have a new story. And if we want to muster the political will to address, right? This is him writing, Nir Eyal, right, with Clinton's introduction. If we want to muster the political will to address all of these forms of risk, we need a new story. And a new story, he goes to the possible governance or economic solutions to risk. He said, none of those are going to do it. We need a new story, and we have no idea what it is. Okay, so that's where we're dealing here. We're dealing in the realm of the new story. We need a shared global story. That's one. Why do we need a shared global story? Right, and I want to get this so this becomes your language, because that's how we're going to create Florence here. Right. Me giving a bunch of talks is not going to create Florence. What's going to create Florence if we create a shared language together? Let's be more precise, right? We're in number 1. Let's be precise, rigorous, right? So there's generator function number 1 is the lack of a coherent global story in which we create actually a global sense of intimacy, right? We're part of a shared story. Why do we need a global sense of intimacy? Let's go with me sentence by sentence until we can track it together. And I apologize, right? The sweet guy of the last 4 times, he's gone. And I know he's on vacation, right? So I'm being a little demanding. I apologize sincerely. Well, insincerely, right? But be with me, okay? Right? Because let's get this ourselves, right? Why do we need a shared global narrative? Because you can't generate global action without global coherence. And every single challenge we have is global, right? None of them can be handled locally. No, there's not one existential risk or catastrophic risk that can be handled by sovereign nations. That's one of the reasons, right, Jeffrey? Right. It's one of the reasons, Richard, right, why sovereign nations don't want to spend money on existential risk, right? Because it's not our problem, right? It's not a sovereign nation issue. We're so used to thinking in terms of sovereign nations. Sovereign nations can't handle existential or catastrophic risk. All the issues are global, and they require concerted global coherence. Just one example, data. Big data is one of the major challenges to the future, not of humanity, but of our humanity, the second form of existential risk. You can't handle data, the issue and the challenge of data and the risks it creates without a global covenant around data. Artificial intelligence. You can't begin to talk about artificial intelligence without, right, a global covenant on artificial intelligence, because otherwise you've got the multipolar trap, right? If one person says, oh, we're going to step out of this, we're going to create restrictions, but your competitor country, say China, says we're not stepping out of it, well, then you can't step out. You got to stay in the race. Right? So unless there's a global intimacy, right, which moves beyond ethnocentric boundaries, and which begins to actually sing the song of all of reality together, there's actually a world-centric intimacy, which can only be created if we have a shared world-centric story, right? Can't happen any other way. And a shared world-centric story is not a made-up story, but it's an integration of the best streams of wisdom, pre-modern, modern, and postmodern, integrated in a new whole, postmodern, a new, right? A new vision, right? A new renaissance, right? A new story of what it means to be a human being, and a new universe story, a new narrative of identity, right? Rooted in the deepest sciences. Unless you have that, there's no game, there's no chance. So because all our problems are global, number one, right? Therefore, they require, right, global concerted action to respond. 2, 3, you can't have global concerted action without global coherence. 3, 4, you can't have global coherence unless you have global intimacy. 4, and right now we're experiencing what we would call, and we have called here, a global intimacy disorder. 5, you can only overcome a global intimacy disorder by creating shared intimacy. 5, 6, you can only create shared intimacy by creating a shared story. Okay, and just look at any of us, look at our relationships. Any relationship you have, a close friend, a partner, right, an ex-partner, right, a beloved of any kind, son, daughter, friend, right, whatever it is. If you don't have a shared narrative about your journey together, you don't have a shared grammar of value, you can do all the therapy you want, and you can do all the, right, whatever you want, it's not going to work. Right? You need a shared grammar of value, and you need a shared story about who you are. That's how you recreate intimacy. That's how you get over an intimacy disorder. So that's true in terms of a personal intimacy disorder, but it's also true in terms of a global intimacy disorder. Does that make sense? Okay. Right. Absolutely right. History does prove this, right? As Gabrielle wrote. Does everyone get that? So therefore, the first generator function of existential risk is at a moment in which we require a shared global narrative, we don't have one. And therefore, we can't take global action because we don't have global coherence. So what do we need to do? But that tells us something. If you really get this, if I really get this, if we really get this together, then we've begun to create Florence in Miami. We've begun to step out of our local charities, as important as they are, and our local issues, and we've begun to actually become Da Vinci, as it were, together. We get to become Da Vinci together. There's not one Da Vinci, we're Da Vinci together. We can begin to see it. Okay, so now what's the response? If that's the first generator function of existential risk, then what's the response? Okay, and again, I apologize again. Right? I apologize again. What's the response? Right? What's the response? So what's the response? The response is to create a shared story. Right? And you notice that, right? That becomes not fanciful. That's not you got to create a shared story that everyone can get on board on, which moves beyond the polarities. Right? We're in a polarized world. Right? Nations are polarized against nations within nations. Just look at the United States. Massive polarity because there's these different set of values. There's no shared story. Right? Wow. Right? Wow. And anyone who's participating in the demonization of the other, right, is actually short-sighted. What's the shared story? What's the shared set of values? What now? A shared set of values, not just values, not just, oh, we both agree on goodness. No, it's a shared understanding of the nature of reality, meaning you need a shared universe story, narrative one. You need a shared narrative of identity, narrative two. You need a shared narrative of community, narrative three. You need a shared story of power, a shared narrative of power. That's a big deal. Without those four, you can't move. Right? And there's a fifth, which I'm not going to talk about today. You need a shared narrative of desire. And that's a whole conversation, which we're not going to do today. So that is generator function number one. That's generator function number one. Good, everyone? So I'm checking in on the chat box. How many people track that? How are we doing? How are we doing? How many people don't like my sweater? Don't answer that question. Okay? How many people track that? We got one. Do we have a two? Do we have three? Do we have three in the house? Going once, going twice. We got two people. Who else? Any of the new people? How you doing? How are we doing? We're checking in here. We're together here. Good. We got a yes. We got a yes. Does anyone have a question? We're going to stop for 1 second. Anyone have a question? Anyone not get something? Did you miss a piece along the way? Right. This is not a time to be shy. And if you are shy, let's get over it right now. But only a relevant question, not a general one, but there's some piece you didn't get here. Something that's missing. Our new people, right? Right. Gabriel, maybe check in on our new people or make sure they're okay. We're creating Florence together. This is not a lovely lecture. This is not entertainment. This is not wisdotainment. We want to create Florence. So we got to get these four pieces. We got to be on board with them. We got to understand them. Okay. Yay. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Sammy, John, how you doing over there? Okay. Okay. We're good. All right. We're good. By the way, next time, everybody, we should bring wine. We can't save the world without wine. We got wine there? Okay, good. You can't save the world without some good wine. That's obvious. Okay. Number two, do we have a drum roll? Do we have a drum roll? Okay, let's have a drum roll. Okay, so here we go. Number two. So number two is the second generator function of existential risk is also the failure of story, but this time in a different way. It's the particular story that's in play. What is the story that's in play? And what's the story that's in play? What is the governing story of reality today? Anybody? What's the governing story? The governing story of reality today is rivalrous conflict, governed by a win-lose metrics, which we call the success story. Does everyone get that? That is the governing story in Russia. It's the governing story in China. It's the governing story in every state in the United States. It's the governing story in Asia. That is the governing story. It's rivalrous conflict. I want to rise, right? I'm competitive with you, right? I'm competitive. I'm going to break that down for sure. We're going to for sure break that down, right? And my metrics is, am I successful? Right? So let's just take a look at what that means. Every department of government argues with every other department of government. Everyone within a department is trying to get promoted. I'm going to be promoted. You're not going to get promoted. I want to make more money. I want to get more status. Right? It's always a win-lose metrics. Right? I'm going to be chosen. You're not going to be chosen for the part. Right? I'm going to be successful. Right? I'm going to be more successful than you. It's always a success story. A success story is always based on rivalrous conflict. Right? Am I going to get into the best college? And am I going to get into the best job? Right? Am I going to be successful in getting the promotion? Is my company outcompete another company? Right? In terms of a limited market resource, country against country, right? Divisions, right, run through every dimension of society, and it's always win-lose. I'll just give you one very narrow example, but we all know it in our lives, right? We all know it in our lives, right? In other words, just look at yourself. I want to be successful. What does that mean? Does it mean I want to be good? No. Does it mean I want to be true? No. Doesn't, right? Not about the good, the true, and the beautiful, right? It's not about my ethos, right? It's not about, right, have I fulfilled my unique life purpose, right? I actually have an intrinsic need to be successful, and successful is always governed by, right, how I appear, right, in the public realm, and how I appear to myself, and how I measure up, right, against others. It's not an intrinsic self-referential understanding. It's how I measure up. So how many people get what we mean by the success story? How many people can actually kind of access in your own life, right, in my own life, right, the sense that we have to be successful? It's the governing story. It's a successful country. It's a successful business. It's a successful career. It's a successful marriage. But success is always my success, or me and my family's success, or me and my nation's success, right? It's always rivalrous. It's always against some other group. There's an in-group and there's an out-group, right? Everyone get that? There's an in-group and an out-group. I take care of the in-group. I'm not concerned with the out-group. It's always the way it works. I'll just give you the one example. I'll give you a simple example that we talked about last time, okay? But it's a good example. So there's a couple of guys. Sergey, it's a good dude, and Larry, and they're Stanford graduates, and they're a little geeky, right? And they write this great paper in 1998, and they say they want to develop a search engine. And they say, though, that ethically, in terms of anything that they know about ethics, a search engine can also be selling advertising, for lots of reasons, okay? They get a bunch of investors. They're living in Silicon Valley, which is a big win-lose metrics, rivalrous conflict place, right? The dot-com world goes bust. The year is 2000. It's actually April of 2000. They get calls from both of their hedge funds that are invested in Google. That was the name of the little company, right? And, they can proceed as they are, and they can have a company that's going to, market cap at 50 million, something like that. But they don't want to do that because, as Sergey said, I feel like a schmuck in Silicon Valley. I feel like a nobody. So we can't do that. And so they bump into this guy, Amir Patel. Amir Patel is a young guy from Stanford into what was called then reality mining, right? Or collecting, the kind of the digital breadcrumbs on the web, right? Reality mining, right? And actually creating a way to actually gather, whoever just came on, if you can just mute yourself, right? Creating a way to gather the information of the people on the web, right? And then dumping that information into machine intelligence, developing a personality profile, right, on those people, right, that creates predictive analysis about what those people will do. Okay, so that became the business model of Google, meaning everything you do on the web is now surveilled, right? Google actually created this. They created an entirely new field, right? Surveillance capitalism. Everything you do is fed into machine intelligence. Machine intelligence then creates predictive analysis across large scales of people about what you'll do. That machine intelligence, right, that generates that predictive analysis, then conducts, billions of auctions happening all the time. And then that information, that predictive analysis, is sold to third parties, like Russian intelligence, like Chinese intelligence. But there's not a deal. You're not talking to a third party. That actually the third parties are, for the most part, anonymous. Just go slow. And those third parties then act to change your behavior. Those third parties are called advertisers, but actually they're manipulating you, right, at a scale that's unimaginable because they know actually pretty much everything about you, all of your weak points, all of your vulnerabilities. They know exactly when to send you a message that will depress the possibility that you'll vote or increase the possibility that you'll vote, that will get you to buy this product or make this decision. And they know when you're angry, when you're upset, when your period is, right? Like all of this is available, right, through information that's been gleaned together by what one data scientist calls digital breadcrumbs. So the same two boys, stay with me, who in 1998, right, basically write this major paper about the fundamental failure of ethos if you actually have a search engine that sells advertising, right, then run into a problem in 2000 in which they're not going to be successful by the standard of their community, which happens to be Silicon Valley. They're good boys, right? They're in rivalrous conflict. They throw out their entire ethos, right? And they adopt, right, this method of surveillance capitalism, right, that's actually dominating reality today, and that's generated social media, and that's generated, right, a series of fundamentally disastrous effects, right, of amplified negativity, depression, right, the robbing of free will, the swing of elections. I mean, we talked about that last time. I'm not going to go into it now, but what caused them to make that decision? And I'm answering Gabrielle's question. What caused them to make that decision was, right, they were governed by a success story. They didn't have any other story that governed them. And so when that success was challenged, right, they basically created an entire business model that contradicted everything they believed in until that moment. So we're all living, right, in this win-lose metric success story. Now, this win-lose metric success story drives the extraction model. Does everyone get that sentence? Meaning, why are we creating so many products that we don't need? Why are we contriving needs, right? Why are we doing all this? We're doing all this because we're seeking status, because our only metrics is a win-lose metrics, right? And so we generate products, right, that are not needed, and we extract resources from the earth in order to generate those products. We generate an enormous amount of waste. We have this huge, right, ignoring, right, of all the people on the other side, right, of the win-lose metrics, meaning the losers or those who are not visible to us, right? So the win-lose metrics generates all the causes of climate crisis, right? All the gap between the have and have-nots, right? It means every single issue that's happening, which is a serious existential risk, is driven by people who experience as their interior story, which is the entire world, a rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics. Right? That's the installed story of humanity today. It's installed, it's downloaded in the hard drive, and everything emerges from it. Okay, wow. So that's the second generator function of existential risk. Has everyone got that one? We good? We good? Give me some yeses if we got, you got the distinction. Give me some yeses if we got the second one. How we doing? How we doing, everybody? Give me some yeses. Do we got that one? We get it? It's a big thing to get. It's to get that that's the story that actually governs reality is a very, very big deal. Okay, what's the third? What's number three? What's the third kind of generator function, right, for existential risk? So the third generator function for existential risk, and it's a different way of saying it, and now it's going to get super sophisticated, but we're going to try and be super clear, okay? So the third generator function for existential risk well, you know what I'm gonna do? Here's what I'm gonna do. Let's stop here. Let's hold for a second. I'm not gonna do the third generator function. Let's stay with the first two. Let's stay with the first two. And let's see if we can respond to the first two, okay? So in order to create a shared story, okay, which is what, that would be the response, right? We'd have to create what? What did we say? We said we need a shared universe story, a shared story of identity, a narrative of identity. What we mean again is a narrative of identity, which is beyond Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Arab, right, man, woman, right, boy, girl, trans, right, you know, French, British, Chinese, right? Those are all local identities. Now, some of them are extremely important, right? So in other words, local identities are beautiful and they're not all the same. They can have great value, right? So you can, for example, let's say in terms of religion, you can practice, right, in a serious version, right, of a classical religion. And I've got to practice in a serious version because classical religions also have great shadows. So you need to be an evolved form of a classical religion. And that's a gorgeous thing to do. And that's a valid form of information in cosmos that's held by the great wisdom traditions. That's great. But that can't exhaust your identity, right? That cannot exhaust your identity. It cannot, right? If it does, you're living in a delusion, right? It can't exhaust your identity. That's a dimension of your identity, but you have to be, drum roll, a dual citizen. You have to be a citizen of your local passport, and you can be deeply loyal to that, right? You can be deeply loyal, number one, to your family, number two, to, let's say, your nation or your larger group, egocentric, ethnocentric, but you also have to have another passport, which is a passport to the world. Because if you don't have a passport to the world and existential risk fulfills itself, your system's gone. So pragmatically, that's true, but it's more than that. You've got to open your heart and literally be, as Abraham Cook once wrote, one who sings the song of himself and his family, one who sings the song of his nation, one who sings the song of all human beings on the planet, the world, and one who sings the song of the cosmos. You have to sing, it's called the fourfold song. You got to sing all the songs together, right? That's what an awakened human being does, okay? So let's see if we can do something shocking. We're gonna now we're gonna play. Okay, everyone ready to play? Now, up to now this was kind of intense, and I appreciate it. I want to just honor everyone for staying and holding in the intensity, and then for staying in. And so now we're gonna play. It's gonna get more intense but lighter. That's so we're gonna step into delight now. We're gonna step into the realm of delight. Okay, so who's ready to step into delight? Anybody ready? So let's do it. I'm gonna look at the chat box, and if I don't get like 7 yeses on delight, right? We're doing active listening. We got 1 yes, 2, we got 2, we got 3, we got 4, we got 5, we got 6 and 7. 6 and 7, we can't get there yet. We're almost there. We go. Okay, here we go. All right, so let's step into it. What is our narrative of reality? Okay. And each one of these topics is a series of essays. And on each one of these topics, I have to confess my sins, although not all of them, right, in this particular moment at least. But we're writing thousands of footnotes on each one of these sentences, and serious footnotes, but I want to see if we can capture it. I want to articulate in these next few minutes, right, a universe story and a narrative of identity together, which gives you a sense of what we mean. How do we respond to existential risk? So first, we need to revision how we understand reality itself. Okay? We need to revision reality itself. And to revision reality itself, we need to understand what drives reality. So the success story, win-lose metrics, that's a product of modernity, right? In pre-modernity, there was a sense that the world had intrinsic value, but that value was owned by a particular tribe or a particular religion or a particular nation to whom all other nations must eventually bow. And that didn't work. That was rivalrous conflict between all the nations. It was an early version, right? So you need to be obedient to the divine, but the divine only spoke to my nation for real, not to yours. So therefore you should be killed and your nation, and my nation's ultimately going to triumph over your nation, right? That didn't work, okay? Nor should it have worked, right? So we need to go into modernity. Modernity says, no, each individual has individual value by themselves. That's great. But then modernity loses the larger sense of the value of cosmos, and modernity never articulates a new universe story. The universe story of modernity is that we're all separate selves, that the universe is governed by mechanical laws, right? And that those mechanical laws govern in reality, and that the universe is fundamentally, and this became the dominant story of modernity, material and nothing but material. No one proved that. It was much more of a rebellion against pre-modernity, right? The pre-modern mythological structures, right, which were so wildly damaging, which caused such massive suffering in the world, in which, you know, the average person was dead by 30, in which the overwhelming majority of people suffered abjectly till the day of their death. There's only a narrow, tiny elite that had any sense of breathing air. There was no sense, right, of social mobility. There was no sense of a world animated, you know, by an eros of transformation. None of that existed. Certainly there were no universal human rights, and none of that existed. There was no education, other than a very, very tiny elite, et cetera, et cetera. So, right, modernity rebels against pre-modernity in this kind of powerful way, but modernity then introduces, right, this story of the desiccated individual who has dignity, but who's not part of anything, right? Who's therefore, since the individual's not part of anything, then the individual has to fend for themselves. And what emerges is, right, a competitive win-lose metric success story, right? Rivalrous conflict. Right? That's how that story emerged. It emerged out of the story of the individuals. How does the individual distinguish themselves? They compete in the free market, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So what's the news story? So this news story is again, I must have read, you know, around, you know, 600-700, you know, essays in science, right, to say this next sentence, and, you know, and you know, talk to really the best minds in this particular area, right, around the world. And there's a growing understanding of this, which is not the mainstream consensus. The mainstream consensus is horribly outmoded, right? But if you actually bring the best information together, you basically get the following: evolution is the love story of the universe. That's the best science we have today. Evolution is the love story of the universe. And by love, we don't mean exactly ordinary love, right? It's not just egocentric love between two people, which is beautiful, but it's actually the source of that love. It's the eros that drives cosmos. It's what's called in one text, ahava azah, right? Outrageous love, right? It's an evolutionary love, right? So there's this eros, and eros is this movement towards ever deeper contact and ever greater wholeness. That's our definition of eros. Eros equals, here's our equation, eros equals, right, the movement towards ever deeper contact and ever greater wholeness. It's a definition of eros. That eros drives reality. Reality is actually a love story, right? Evolution is the love story of the universe, right? And we've imaged that just in a couple of moments, right? Last time and the time before in Salon 4 and 3 and 2 even. And we talked about the quality of allurement or eros that brings, for example, subatomic particles together to create a new whole. And that new whole is an atom. It's a new intimacy. It's a new configuration of intimacy. It's a new whole. And then it brings atoms together, right, to create a new whole, which is a molecule, and molecules together to create a macromolecule. So that movement of eros, which aggregates the separate, right, without obliterating its identity. So there's still subatomic particles, but now they're part of an atom, creates a new level of depth in reality. That atom has new function, it has new capacity, right? It has new quality, right? It has new purpose. Those atoms come together, atoms don't disappear, but they aggregate together into a larger whole, right? Meaning, what drives that aggregation? What drives subatomic particles to create deeper contact between each other and to create a new whole, which is an atom? Eros, allurement. You can call it gravity, but all gravity means is allurement. There's nothing underneath gravity. Right? Gravity is allurement. That's what it is. Right? So the four forces are expressions, physical expressions of the interior quality of allurement, right? That drives cosmos. It brings separate parts, right? Reality organizes separate parts into larger wholes. That's the quality of eros that's driving reality. Reality is a love story all the way up and down the evolutionary chain. Wow. So that's one. Stay close. We're gonna fly now. So that's one. That's step one. Now we could spend a lot of time, right? 40 hours, right, going deep into this and explaining what actually drives reality, the telos that drives reality. One of the structures, one of the many, many, many structures driving reality is random mutation, right, which is selected by natural selection. That's one of 10 structures that drive evolution. One of. There's also symbiogenesis. There's also transposition. Right? There's also horizontal gene transfer. Right? There's also epigenetics. All of those are ignored by the Neo-Darwinian synthesis and are being integrated right at the leading edges of science today. If you didn't get that sentence, press delete on it. But if you did, you understand what I meant. And that is to say, the notion that this purely random, chance, meaningless process, right, random mutation, it actually creates larger wholes, right, governed by codes, right, literal codes, and there's no code in the world that's not in some way designed, is absurd. That's just not true. Now, for those of you who are tracking this little piece of it, you can skip it. We're not actually suggesting what Christian fundamentalists call intelligent design. No, that's a mistake. There is intelligent design to cosmos, but intelligent design is hijacked by fundamentalism, and it uses arguments that ignore certain key dimensions of science, although it has some important things to say. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that the actual inherent process of the creative universe, the universe is inherently creative, it's inherently conscious, it's inherently alive. Like, wow, it's a field of aliveness, it's a field of creativity, it's a field of intelligence, right? A cell itself rewrites its own DNA, right? A cell itself, right, is massively intelligent, every individual cell, right? I mean, so it's very, very clear that there's an intelligent process that's driving towards more and more life, more and more love, more and more eros, more and more care, right? That's across deep time. That's the movement of evolution. So evolution is the love story of the universe. And I'm just touching on that now. That's the kind of the narrative. We live in a cosmo-erotic universe. If you would want to summarize, for example, one wisdom tradition, which is called Kabbalah, the Kabbalah's basic premise is that we live in a cosmo-erotic universe. That's it. Done. That's what the whole thing's about. But it's also what the best understanding of the exterior sciences are today. Wow. That's what Rumi is about in Sufism, right? When he's talking about this reality that's drenched in love. But Rumi's talking from the perspective of the interior sciences, so are the Kabbalists, while symbiogenesis, right, and horizontal gene transfer, right, and epigenetics and transposition, right, and the movement of allurement driving cosmos, that's exterior science. But you bring them together, it's very clear. Evolution is the love story of the universe. Can you imagine what it means, right, to live in a world where most people don't know the story of reality? Right, wow. Or what it means to live thinking that the world's a tale told by an idiot, full of sounds and furies signifying nothing. Because there were bad pre-modern stories that modernity rejected, and then we're left with this desiccated view of the universe because we haven't actually integrated, right, the leading edge insights from the different dimensions and wove them together into a new coherent story. Okay, so evolution is the love story of the universe. That's one. Two, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? I am evolution in person. That's who I am. That's actually true. That's not made up. That's not a fanciful idea. It's true. I am evolution in person. I don't live in the universe. Right, Jeffrey? I don't live in the universe. That's not right. That's just simply wrong. That's just wrong science. I don't live in the universe. Right? The universe lives in me. Does that make sense, everyone? Right? In other words, let's follow closely. There's a Big Bang explodes. Right? So the world is incepted. And all the laws of mathematics are instantaneously there, right, in 1 second, right? And then the world of matter unfolds, the physiosphere. That's cosmological evolution. And then all these levels of matter then explode again in a second Big Bang, which is life, right? Life, right? So the first cell, right, emerges, right, in the great seas. And we'll talk at a different time about different stages of cellular emergence. But so we now go from cellular emergence all the way up to kind of early plants, right? Amphibians, fish, right? Early animals, neural nets, neural cords, right? Animals, right? Early mammals, later mammals, right? Wow, all the stages of life, right? Now the stages of life include all the stages of matter, right? So the biosphere, right? Biological evolution includes all of matter, all of the physiosphere. Then we explode again, right, into the noosphere, right? Nous, mind, self-reflective mind, the depth of self-reflective mind, humanity, right? And then humanity goes through all of its stages until we get to, right, Sammy and John, our new participants today, right? To Mark, to Gabrielle, to Sharif, who's on his plane, who keeps coming in and out. And I hope you're here now, Sharif. Love you, brother, madly. Okay, so here we are, okay? So all of reality lives in me. All of the hadrons, all of the muons, all of the protons, all of the allurement, right, between the parts, right, all the levels of matter, all the levels of life, all of that quite literally lives in me. Does everyone get that? So I don't live in the universe. The universe lives in me. That's just true. That's not a poetic idea, although it's very poetic, but it's just true. To think I live in the universe is like thinking the earth is flat. Not true. Right? The universe lives in me, which means that all of the allurement, all of the eros, right, all of the prior love story of reality actually lives in me, right? So I am evolution in person. Okay, wow. It's like, wow, that's a major paradigm shift. That's a Copernican revolution in self-understanding. It's not I live in the universe as a local separate self, right, in a rivalrous conflict, right, which is governed by a win-lose metrics, trying to somehow get ahead, get status, be a little bit creative and die. That's how everybody lives. That's just not true. Right? The universe lives in me, right? And right, wow. And the universe, right, appears in me uniquely, right? Stay close, Benjamin, okay? So let's go 3. When we're talking about love here, when we say evolution is the love story of the universe, we're not talking about ordinary love. We're talking about what we're calling, right, outrageous love, right, eros, right, evolutionary love, right, the eros that animates the 4 forces of cosmos. Everyone get that? That's the eros that animates the 4 forces of cosmos. The strong and the weak nuclear, the electromagnetic, the gravitational are animated by this force of eros, which science sometimes calls the self-organizing universe, or sometimes we call it, another cosmologist calls it the self-actualizing cosmos. Isn't that beautiful? There's a self-actualizing cosmos, right? And I am, quite literally, I am the self-actualizing cosmos in person. So the evolutionary impulse is awake and alive in me. Right? Does everyone get that? And so in order to be authentic, to actually be in my genuine identity, I don't want to spend my whole life fighting my ego. Yeah, there's parts of my complex self I should work out, but it's not about spending my whole life fighting my ego to become spiritual. No, that's an old story. It's about aligning with the evolutionary impulse. It's about aligning with my true identity. And I am the evolutionary impulse in person. I am evolution in person. That's who I am. I am evolution. That's true. And I am evolution in person, right? I am a unique expression of the evolutionary impulse, and the same impulse, right, that birthed reality, and the same impulse that drove, right, animated by eros, that drove every dimension of life, right, from one to the next, that aggregated separate parts into larger wholes, that moved us through all of matter, right, to all of life, to all of mind, that same evolutionary impulse pulses in me. Wow. So am I aligned with a kind of narrow, distorted, contracted, and false self-understanding as a monadic separate self, disconnected and alienated from the larger structures of reality, struggling for my autonomy in a rivalrous conflict, right? Completely moved by social pressure, dominated by social networks, unable to actually find my center. My center is the evolutionary impulse that lives in me. So when I align with the evolutionary impulse, I align with my true identity. When I align with Eros, right? Now here's the thing. That's number 3. But number 4, Eros always moves towards individuation. Eros moves towards uniqueness. Eros is not generic. So let's just take a look for a second. We have here, let's see who we have here. Let me take a look here. Okay, we have, let's take a look. Okay, so Bega, how you doing? So we got Bega here, B-E-G-A, Bega. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And then we've got, let's say, I don't know, Gabrielle. Okay, so everyone take a look, Bega and Gabrielle. Right, just look at their faces. Are you confused? Like, which one's Gabrielle, which is Bega? We're not confused. Karen and Suzette. Are we confused? Benjamin and Jamie. Are we confused? Sammy and Johnny. We're not confused. You look at a person instantly, you see their face, and you see something irreducibly unique, which never was, is, or will be ever again. And when you look at a person's cellular structure, you see that there's an entire dimension that's the same. We're all the same. And yet, there's an utter singularity that completely defines that person. That's uniqueness. So one of the movements of Eros is Eros moves towards more and more uniqueness. And uniqueness is my unique quality of personhood, right? My individuated personhood. So Eros individuates, right? Eros is individuating as Sharif. Eros is individuating as Richard. So reality is having a Richard experience. But that's true, right? Reality is having a unique Richard experience, which is unlike any other, which means infinite source individuates as Richard in a way that infinite source never individuated before Richard. And so therefore infinite source experiences a shocking self-recognition in Richard that it can't experience in Marc or Sharif or Gabrielle. Wow. Right? So there's a unique configuration of Eros that incarnates as Richard, as Jeffrey, right? As, right, Karen, right? As David, right? As Christina. Right? So personhood, that's the 4th principle. Cosmos values personhood. That's the 4th principle. Cosmos individuates uniquely, and uniqueness is not merely a social, psychological, or cultural construction. Uniqueness is irreducible. We are all partially constructed by social, psychological, and cultural factors, but we're not exhausted by them. Those come together and are animated before and after by an irreducible uniqueness, which is where human value comes from. That's the 4th. So that's the 4th quality, is irreducible personhood. That's 4. 5, what does that mean? That means, now here it gets wild and shocking and beautiful. And let's stay close. We just got a few more short minutes, okay? We started at about 8:14, right? Was that right, Gabriel? About 8:14, it's about 7:14, so it means we're gonna finish within 60 minutes. So we're gonna be done by 8:14. We've got 7 minutes left, okay? So that's all we got, 7 minutes. We gotta heal the broken narratives in the next 6.5, 7 minutes, okay? So here's number 5. Let's put them all together. If you really understand that, not just that I live in the universe lives in me. 1. 2 is evolution is, right, the love story of the universe. Reality is not just a fact, it's a story. And it's not an ordinary story, right? It's a love story. It's not an ordinary love story. It's an outrageous love story. It's an erotic love story, right? It's an evolutionary love story, right? Reality is animated by Eros and is moved by Eros. And if you really get that in some deep and profound way, then you get that all of that, matter, life, and mind, all driven by Eros, that is the evolution of love to deeper and wider and larger forms, all of that lives in you, all of it, it all lives in you completely. So that means that your story, right, so if reality is a story, it's a story that goes from matter to life to mind. Reality is not just a fact, it's a story. There's a narrative arc to cosmos, right? Cosmological evolution, first Big Bang, second Big Bang, biological evolution, third Big Bang, right? Cultural evolution, right? The physiosphere to the biosphere to the noosphere. And if you that's a story, there's a narrative arc, one level built on the level before it. There's a clear plot line, there's a clear trajectory. Where reality is moving, there's a plot line to cosmos, right? Towards ever more uniqueness, towards ever more eros, towards ever more care, towards ever more creativity, towards ever more freedom, towards ever more elegant order. These are the plot lines of cosmos. If you get all that, and all that's living in you, it's living in me, that means that my story is part of the cosmic story. And my story is not isolated. It's part of, I'm an expression of cosmos. I am cosmos in person, literally. Right? So my story is the same as the cosmic story. My story is an outrageous love story. That's right. My story is an outrageous love story, but my story is not a generic outrageous love story. My story is a unique outrageous love story. Right? I incarnate a unique quality of outrageous love, and a unique trajectory of outrageous love. So my life is not just a fact, my life is a story. That's why we go to movies. That's why we read, because we get that there's a narrative arc. That's why we're entranced in a movie. We're at home because we're being told a story. We get that it's a story, right? We think not in facts, we think in stories, because story is actually the nature of reality, right? So my life is a story, but it's not an ordinary story. It's an outrageous love story, right? That's number 5, okay? But when you get that, you actually get 6, which means your story, my story, your story is chapter and verse in the universal love story. Wow, your story is chapter and verse in evolution, which is the love story of the universe. That's number 6, and here's number 7. With that, we finish. Which means, my friends, and to get this is to actually get a direct transmission, right, of what enlightenment actually means in every tradition. Right? So this is not information, this is transmission. Let's feel this and incarnate it. What it means is that you are personally implicated in the plot line of the cosmos. You're personally implicated in the plot line of the cosmos. But that's not a dogmatic statement. Right? That's actually the fact of reality. You're personally implicated, right, in the evolutionary story. Wow, that's a big deal. Right? You're uniquely personally implicated, right, in the love story of the universe. Okay, let's hold here. Let's hold here. We just went through these 7 steps, but these 7 steps are a completely different narrative of the universe based on the integration of the best sciences, interior and exterior, and they're a complete different narrative of identity. What would it mean if every person understood my story is a unique, outrageous love story, which is chapter and verse in the universe, a love story? And what would it mean if we demonstrated that, not homiletically, not poetically, right? Not in metaphor, not in myth, but actually scientifically, interior and exterior science. So that was a given fact of reality that actually imbued who we were, right? That animated everything. You would have then changed the source code of cosmos, because cosmos, which is what we call today in metamodern thought a hyperobject, this inordinately complex space governed by multitudinous variables, is actually, like all complex systems in complexity theory and its subset chaos theory, is driven by a few simple rules. And what are those few simple rules? The animating narrative, the animating story is the core simple rule. And what systems theory with its daughter complexity theory with its subset of chaos theory teach us is that only by changing or evolving the simple rules do we change the entire complex system. That's what we mean when we say the generator function of existential risk, right, is a failed story. And therefore, by retelling the story in a way that integrates all of the scientific facts, interior and exterior, we actually reformulate the simple rules and change the entire trajectory of the future and the present. Okay, stop. Wow, that's a big deal. 8:14, 1 hour, 60 minutes.
Mark, wow. That was
Sure.
That was crazy.
Crazy, right?
And
Wow.
drinking the good tequila
We're drinking the good tequila. We are,
while
right?
the cat's away.
Right? While the cat's away. Absolutely. Sharif, he may be listening on the plane. So Sharif, don't tell anyone. Okay, yay. Yeah. How many people, let's go in the chat box. Gabby, can we ask everyone, let's ask how many people followed. How many people stayed with us?
And any questions in order to unmute oneself.
Please. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. And we can hold the silence, right? Which is totally wonderful, right? And please.
Okay. I've got your list here, totally get you. And I've actually, from a very young age said, you know, if evil didn't exist in me, then evil couldn't exist in the universe. You know, I created that paradigm of the story. But what is number 3 in your list? I don't.
Number three, I got you, Jeffrey. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Thank you. Number 3 is that when we talk about love, we're not talking about what we might call ordinary love, right? That love which exists only between human beings, which is a particular social expression, which is very beautiful. We're talking about actually the source love. We're talking about outrageous love, evolutionary love, eros, as the animating force of cosmos. That is to say, we've exiled love, right? From the universe into the human world, then from the human world, usually into a particular form of love, which is either romantic or parental love. But actually, that's the exile of love. That's an expression of something far more root, far more source, which is the animating eros of cosmos itself. That's what we mean. That's critical to understand that the universe itself, right, is a love story. And of course, we don't mean that the universe is going on a date, right? We mean something much more profound. That's what Meister Eckhart meant when he said, right, all of reality is always kissing. He was pointing to that.
Put number 3 in one succinct sentence if you can.
When we speak about love, we speak not about ordinary love, but about outrageous love, the love which is the heart of existence itself.
Right. Okay.
You got it. Thank you, Jeffrey. It's always great and wonderful to be with you. Who else? Sammy, go run. Beautiful. Thank you. We'll meet again. Okay. Kissing is good. Yay. Anyone else? Anyone else? Right. And we don't, you know, often we do so much in the salon that it takes time to assimilate and to integrate. So totally good. There's no need. We can kind of assimilate, integrate. I just want to just make sure if there's anything I can help with, there's a particular question, a particular inquiry, right? Be glad to, from either any of the people that we study with regularly or any of the new people. The floor is open. Cha.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Okay, so I feel a little awkward because I feel like maybe I missed something. So the universe that exists in each one of us, that it's not out there, and each one of us has a universe inside of ourselves. I think that's kind of like the message that I'm getting. Like the universe, for me, is my universe, and it's real to me, and it's my universe has been created by me and my experiences or whatever. At some point, all of our universes connect and we create a greater like cult, or it makes it more powerful?
Let me jump in. So love you dearly.
I'm not sure if I missed something, and I feel a little.
No, you're great. You're awesome. You're awesome. Super honor, super honor, super respect. I didn't say that everyone's in a separate universe. I didn't say that everyone created their universe. I said that the universe lives in us uniquely. So that means we're all the same. I mean, we all participate in a shared universe, and we're all unique. And that universe lives inside of us. That doesn't mean there's no universe. It doesn't mean that we don't look outside. Of course there's a universe, but all of the history of cosmos, right? Matter, life, and mind all quite literally live inside of Karen, right? So the universe lives in me just like I live in the universe. So it's not that I don't live in the universe, it's that that's just the beginning. The universe always lives in me, and there's a shared universe that lives in all of us, which is why we can talk to each other. It's why there's semiotics. It's why there's meaning between us. It's why we can have a meaningful conversation. It's why our interiors yearn to be recognized by the interior of another. So we all share, we all participate in a shared field of meaning, desire, and eros. And We're all unique expressions of the universe, of the Eros of cosmos. So therefore we have a unique instrument to play, right, in the symphony, right, of Eros that's actually needed by reality, like that. Just hold that. We'll just marinate with that, love. Okay, that's a big couple of sentences, but that's it's like that. Perfect. So I love.
Light went off. I got it.
Well, you did great. You did great. I
Thank
super
you.
appreciate the clarification. Super, super, super. Yay. Okay. So thank you, everyone. I think let's hold here. Let's hold here. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. We want to hold our time. And I really just want to urge anyone who'd like to step forth to get involved in any particular way of resourcing energy, resourcing time, resourcing resource, hearing more about what we're doing, to find Gabrielle, right? I would say to find Sharif, but he's not here with us, but to find Gabrielle and Sharif, obviously, right? And to step in, you want to step in and get involved in a book, get involved in research, get involved in making something happen. Welcome. Thank you, everyone. I turn back to the Honorable Gabrielle, our chair.
Thank you, Mark. And if you guys, any of you have any questions, or you want to just hang, you want to share my tequila, I'm fully available. I have every piece of writing that Mark has ever written. I'm not kidding, because I'm writing his biography right now. So if any of you have questions, I'm fully available at all times, night and day. And it's such a pleasure to see you guys once a month. I'm so glad you're here. And let's stay connected.
Awesome.
You have my email, so please feel free to reach out to me at any time.
Yay. Thank you so much, Gabrielle. Thank you, everyone. What a delight.